You're listening to the Electronic Media Collective Podcast Network. Yeah, it's a mouthful. For more great shows like the one you're about to enjoy, visit electronicmediacollective.com. And now, our feature presentation.
Hey everybody, this is Mike Rotunda, also known as IRS, Erwin R. Shyster, formerly with WWF.
What's going on? It's your girl, Valentina Loca.
Hey everybody, this is Rip Studwell.
Hello everybody, it's Ethan Everhart.
What is up, wrestling world? This is the resident rock star of Impact Pro Wrestling, Adam Love.
This is Lars Metzger.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your golden boy, Bryce Jordan.
Woo! It's the Cornbell Cowboy.
The one called Manders, and you're listening to Shotgun Wrestling Radio.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Shotgun Wrestling Radio, the countdown to Central Empire Wrestling Bridge City Slam. And I'm very excited for tonight's special guest of the program. You saw him at the last show in the Legends Royal Rumble matchup. You're going to see him again at Bridge City Slam. He's probably one of the biggest Chiefs fans that I know, which makes me an instant fan favorite. And of course, I'm welcoming in the one and only, the Iceman, to the program. Iceman, welcome to the show, my friend.
How's it going?
It's going great, man. You know, we just wrapped up a big NFL draft for our Chiefs. The city of Kansas City absolutely just crushed it with the attendance that they had there. And yeah, I think overall, you know, me being a Chiefs fan as well, I think the Chiefs did really, really well. I mean, it's at this point for us, it's just about adding depth. That's all it really is.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I was happy with the draft. I think they addressed some of the needed holes to fill. You know, they definitely I was surprised to only see him draft one wide receiver, though. I figured they would try to go after at least two of them, but I think they got one that they really wanted. So
yeah, and then just before we went on the air here, they announced they signed another tackle too, Donovan Smith to a 1-year deal. So it sounds like that's like a 1-year, $9 million deal. So I'm sure it'll be another veteran piece for Patrick Mahomes, which is, again, that's the biggest thing, is protecting your quarterback.
Oh my gosh, especially when, you know, they've got everything they've got wrapped up, you know, in him. And really, I mean, the whole dynamic of the team changes whenever he's not in the game. So
one, it's amazing too. We'll get to wrestling, folks. Trust me, we will. It's amazing too if you watching what Veach has done since that Super Bowl loss to Tampa Bay, where he was running for his life. He's rebuilt that offensive line from the ground up, where I don't feel like a lot of GMs would have. I feel like they kind of would have been like, well, we'll be okay. But no, Veach was like, no, we have to protect our investment. And I think he's done a stellar job.
Oh, by far, I think Brett Veach is probably one of the best general managers, not only in all of football, but in the Chiefs' history that they've had. Now, they've had some other good general managers, but I feel general managers in the past probably would have said, he just needs a new running back, or more wide receivers, or we need more defensive backs, or something like that. He wouldn't have. I feel general managers in the past would not have addressed what needed to be addressed. Brett Veach did, and look what happened. They ended up, you know, last couple of years they've had a real good, solid offensive line. So,
yeah, absolutely. Now let's kind of get back to wrestling. I couldn't have you on here and not talk football. I mean, I feel like that's all we talked about at the last Central Empire Wrestling show. So, sure. Yeah, man, you know, for those that aren't aware of you and your history, how long ago was it that you started getting into the business, and where did you get your training done at?
I've been in wrestling now for 23 years. I started training at the tail end of 1999 over in St. Joseph, Missouri. I started with one of the, I like to call it one of the original versions of Central States Wrestling, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. trained with a couple of local guys that were there. No big names. I didn't go to like a big name school or anything like that, but they had a solid school, and there were some great athletes there. There was a lot of good wrestlers that come from there. I feel that I got a good education. And of course, throughout the years, I've always tried to continue my training somewhat by attending a seminar here or there, or, like in the last few years, I've been doing some training with Niles Planquet. I've known him for like 20 plus years, the whole time I've been in wrestling. And he actually opened up his own school probably 3-4 years ago. So I try to go over there a few times a month and jump in some of his training classes, just to keep the ring rust off, just to keep myself fresh in between shows.
Were you always a wrestling fan growing up? Like, what was it about wrestling that made you want to say, "Hey, I want to get into this crazy world of professional wrestling"?
Oh yeah, just like most everybody that's in wrestling now, I was a huge fan. Used to watch it with my grandpa all the time. He was a like hardcore wrestling fan. Every Sunday would go over to my grandparents' house, dinner, and then come that evening around 6:00. Some old school WCW back whenever it was NWA, before it switched over to WCW. So we watched a lot of that together. Watching my grandpa react to what was going on TV kind of helped draw me in. And then once I was able to get in there and watch and see what he was getting all worked up and excited about and everything, it hooked me. And then once I got hooked on the action, then of course, I started paying attention to the characters and the gimmicks and the storylines and all that stuff. And then, that's what really, really got me hooked. So early WCW stuff. Also, I lived in Texas for a short time before we moved back to Missouri. So I also got to be partly raised on World Class, with the Von Erichs, the Freebirds, all of that stuff. Yeah. So I'm an old school guy. So I grew up being a fan, and once I had the opportunity to get in it, I jumped in with both feet.
So who were some of your favorites that you really gravitated towards?
As far as like showmanship, obviously Ric Flair, the whole theatrics of his character, the over the top, the flamboyance, all that stuff. I was really drawn to him. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, really drawn to him. Sting's one of my all-time favorites. I loved the bright colors and the athleticism. And then later on, I really gravitated towards Rey Mysterio, back in the mid '90s, whatever, during Monday Night Wars, stuff like that. Whenever lucha, all the lucha wrestlers started really making an impact on WCW, I noticed Rey Mysterio, and I was like, that's my guy. So it's so the types of wrestlers that I was drawn to have a little bit of something different, and the ones I mentioned were just a few that really grabbed my attention back in the day.
Now, when you first, when you finished training and you got done with all that, how long after your training was it before you actually had your first match?
Well, I was actually still in training. I was about 3 months in to training when the promoter asked me like a week prior to the show. He had a couple of cancellations. This would have been January of 2000. And he come up to me and said, "Hey, are you ready to go? Do you feel confident? Do you have a character, a gimmick? Do you have gear other than just what I would go and train in?" And I said, "No." So the week leading up to the show, I had to come up with a name, a gimmick, what I wanted to look like, as far as my gear goes, all that stuff. So I had like a week to get all that ready. So in a week's time, the Iceman was born, and then had my debut January of 2000. I don't remember the exact date. It was in St. Joe, Missouri, at the Civic Arena that holds about 10,000 people for like basketball and stuff like that. But that night, I think there was roughly around 2,000 people that showed up. So went in there with another local guy that never really made a big name for himself, but he was a veteran. And so I had my very first match against a guy who had been doing it for quite some time. And man, it all happened so quick. It was a blur. Plus I kind of got my bell rung a little bit. So, some of the details are a little fuzzy, but yeah, that's how it all started. So
does it amaze you as much as it does me, like how far we've come in terms of the availability for like wrestling schools? Like back in the day, like in that time frame, it was hard as hell to get in, and now you can just basically Google, wrestling schools near me, and then you can find 5 or 6 different wrestling schools probably just here in the state of Iowa alone. Like, I mean, kids today, man, they have it if they want to pursue this, they have it incredibly lucky, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. When I was first tossing around the idea of wanting to get into wrestling, it was hard to find a school until I discovered the school over in St. Joe. I was looking into Harley Race's school down by, at that time, it was right around, I think he had it in the Lake of the Ozarks before he moved it to right outside of St. Louis. But one of his requirements was, I mean, you pretty much would have to move down there. And, and at the time, I was married to my first wife at the time, young kid, I couldn't uproot my whole family to go chase this wild dream. So once I looked into that and I knew that wasn't a possibility, I just kind of put it on the back burner, and then just happened to go to a local indie show. Didn't know anything about the indies at the time. Went to is probably like 20 minutes or so away from me, and so me and some friends went. This wasn't CSW. This was a different company, and I was introduced to indie wrestling with this different company. And as fate would have it, a guy that I knew from high school, he was a couple years ahead of me in high school, come out as a manager of this tag team. And I was like, holy crap, I know that guy. And so I went and talked to him. He introduced me to the promoter. I went over to St. Joe, had a tryout with that guy. Long story short, spent a little bit of time with that guy. Then that's when I discovered the school over at Central States Wrestling. Discovered it was much better ran, much better training, everything like that. So, but yeah, no, back in the 90s, early 2000s, the availability of schools, unless you wanted to absolutely relocate to the other side of the country, in the Midwest, it was tough.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'll never forget my first indie show. I didn't start going to indie shows until 2005 when I actually moved to Marshalltown to go to college and met what would eventually become my co-host of this show when we started out in 2010. And he was a big wrestling fan, and he was asking me, he's like, hey, do you want to go to the show with us? And I was like, yeah. And it opened up a whole new world to me. I was like, whoa, what is like, yeah, it's when you experience your first independent show, there's just nothing like it. It's such an eye-opening experience.
Oh, absolutely. Whether it, if I remember correctly, the show that I went to, it wasn't good, but growing up, all I knew was, like I said, world class, early NWA/WCW, WWF, that kind of stuff, and anything that I read in magazines. I wasn't even all that familiar with like Japan stuff or anything like that. So going to an independent show that had people on the card that I had no clue who they were.
Yep.
In front of about 100 people, I was like, well, shoot, it's wrestling. It's fun. It was like $10-15 a ticket. So, you can't beat that. So, that was my first exposure to indie wrestling, was a company not so great. So,
yeah, my first show was for a 3XW show, actually. And the main event of it had Frankie Kazarian, because he had just come back to the indies after getting released from WWE, and he was facing Egotistico Fantasco in the main event of the evening. I'm like, God, you're not going to get that as first time wrestling
right.
main event show. So yeah, I got pretty lucky with that one. But yeah, it's independent wrestling, man. It's such a crazy world that we live in, and let's take it now to Central Empire. How did you get hooked up with Austin Bayless and the nice fine folks here at Central Empire Wrestling?
I'm sure I met Austin through some mutual friends somewhere along the line. I had done some work for 3XW, not consistently, but quite a bit. So I don't know. I can't quite remember if I met Austin that way or through other wrestlers that I know. And we just kind of would talk occasionally here and there. And then when I seen that, he had a company and was running, and, most of the towns that he runs from where I actually live, was fairly close. So I kept hitting him up. And then we eventually exchanged numbers. And so we would text occasionally. And gosh, for a lot of years, we would just text back and forth. And because I would see the people he'd have on his card. I'd see, pictures of it, and I'd talk to other wrestlers who had worked for Austin. And I was like, man, that's a place I really want to go, because Austin's got a good reputation. His shows are good. He's got a good following, all that stuff. So I can't quite pinpoint exactly when I met Austin, but it just seems like I've known him forever. And so finally got the opportunity, a few years back to wrestle in a tag match at one of his shows. And so we've been trying to work on it since then to have me come back more frequent. So
now we're getting ready to head into Bridge City Slam. Will this be your first Bridge City, or have you attended the others as fans throughout the year?
This will be my first ever Bridge City Slam.
Okay, so yeah, you're in for a treat.
Yeah, and I know I'm on the show. I'm wrestling on the show, just not quite 100% what's happening. So, but no, I'm really looking forward to it, because I know from what I gather from past Bridge City Slams that I've seen him promote and stuff, he treats this like his WrestleMania.
Mm-hmm.
That's the vibe that I get from it, and the way he talks about it, and everything he puts into it. To me, it's kind of Iowa's version of WrestleMania. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I've often in the last several years really started comparing it to the Hall of Fame weekend that they also do in Waterloo, Iowa, with the Dan Gable Wrestling Museum. It's really been starting to get right up there in terms of really great wrestling weekends, which for wrestling fans in Iowa, it's a great thing, especially for a lot of us who don't travel to some of the bigger conventions like your WrestleCons and some of these other things that I know Austin has been to. And I think it's great that he has, because I feel like he's definitely taken a lot of things he's learned from those conventions and brought that to his own convention and made it very, very fan friendly. And yeah, I'm excited for this year. It's a 2-day event this year. We got events on Friday with the Hall of Fame ceremony, and then I know we're doing trivia and some other events there on Saturday before everything leads in. So yeah, it's pretty exciting, man. I'm really amped to get to it. We got a big steel cage match main event. I know we're planning on having commentary sit at ringside, which I'm really excited for, because when I love being at ringside for commentary, and fortunately in our Oskaloosa building, it's just not quite big enough to get there. So to be ringside, to be ringside for Bridge City is going to be really cool, especially with that cage match for the main event.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's going to be a heck of a main event for sure.
And I know for those that are also interested, they're going to be beforehand photo ops with the cage in the ring. So if you want to get in the ring and get your picture taken inside the steel cage, that is going to be a thing. So again, that's another super cool feature this year for these Bridge City Slam.
Oh, sure, absolutely. And for the guys competing in that cage match, I feel for them. I've been in a couple of cage matches over the years, and it's a whole different feeling when you step inside the ring and you're surrounded by a cage and the door shuts. It's a feeling I can't quite describe unless you've actually been there, and done it. So
yeah, I couldn't agree more. And kind of gearing back here, you've obviously had a lot of years of experience. I think you said 23 years of wrestling experience. Through all that time, do you have an absolute favorite match that you've had yourself, or one that you've seen somewhere down the line that you just thought was one of your absolute favorite matches?
My mind doesn't work when it comes to remembering exact dates or whatever. But it was for Central States Wrestling. Me and another guy had been feuding over the cruiserweight title, and we went back and forth, pretty much all over the state of Kansas and even part of Missouri, and we finally had to have one big blow off match of our feud, and it was for the cruiserweight title, and we decided to do it in a cage. And we decided to sprinkle in a little bit more risk and danger, and we included tables, ladders, and chairs in the cage. So it was a TLC cage match. On paper, sounded like a great idea. Once we were doing it, not so much. So that's one. A few years back, for a company called Metro Pro Wrestling in Kansas City, I got to wrestle Pete Madden, the human wrecking ball. Pete Madden. He's from St. Louis. He's kind of not really kind of. A lot of guys consider him a Midwest icon. He'd wrestled for years and years, and he had retired and been retired for like 2 years. And I have a wrestling bucket list of guys that I would love to wrestle at least one time before I hang it up. And he was on there. And at that particular time, the promoter reached out to me and said, "Hey, I want you on this show. I just don't have you an opponent." And I said, "Well," and I explained to him my wrestling bucket list. And I said, "Can I find my own opponent?" He said, "Yeah, that'll be fine." So I started going through the Rolodex of guys in my mind, and Pete was one of them. And so I called Pete up, and we were on the phone for like an hour, and I pretty much begged him. Well, didn't really beg him, because it didn't take much to get him to come out of retirement. And we ended up having a hardcore match, because that's what he was known for. And started off with a dance-off. We had a hardcore dance-off. And then it turned into a hardcore match. And guys, that ranks right up there with one of my favorites. The one and only time I got to wrestle Delirious for the Central States Cruiserweight title, that's another one that ranks right up there. And as far as matches that I've seen, I've seen a lot of good matches over the years. One of the most recent ones, and I actually was just talking to somebody about this the other day, but I wrestle for a company that runs Arkansas and part of Southern Missouri on a pretty regular basis, called Mid-States Wrestling. And on one of the cards, I think in Springfield, Missouri, for the heavyweight title, it was Luke Langley and Sam Stackhouse. And if you know Sam Stackhouse, bigger guy, he kind of reminds me of Bam Bam Bigelow a little bit. Big guy who can really move, really light on his feet, and he's an awesome wrestler, really. And then Luke Langley, if you're not familiar with him, he's based out of the Kansas City area as well. He's, in my opinion, one of the top 5 best in the Midwest right now. Guy's a super great athlete. Just recently wrestled him for the first time a few weeks ago. That match between him and Sam Stackhouse was awesome. Absolutely awesome. So I'm sure there's more, but the reason why I thought of that match, because I think either training last night or training last week, we were talking about different matches that we've all seen on the indie level that should be on national TV, and that was one of them.
Now, do you follow the current mainstream products today, like WWE or AEW or Impact Wrestling? Do you follow any of those three, or even the Japan products?
I still watch a lot of WWE. Actually, before we came on here tonight, I was getting caught up on AEW from last week. So yeah, I keep up with the modern product. Not so much Impact or even Japan, unless I catch somebody sharing something online on Twitter or Facebook or something like that. But no, I'm not 100% up on any of the Japan stuff or really Impact. I used to be. When Impact was TNA, I was pretty faithful in watching it. But yeah, I try to stay upbeat up to date with the current product.
Who are some of your favorites out there currently on any of the main companies?
Well, Bryan Danielson by far.
Yep.
He's been one of my favorites for a while.
It's been interesting watching him in this heelish role that they've recently put him in AEW as well. It's like he pulls it off great, but yeah, it's been really interesting watching it.
Yeah, I've been a fan of his for a long time, but it just seems like he's just getting better and better and better. And he was already good.
Yeah,
he was already really good, but it just seems like his work overall has just gotten so much better. So Bryan Danielson's one. As far as like WWE goes, I'm a fan of Ricochet. Austin Theory is doing a phenomenal job. He's playing that role really well right now.
Yeah.
Seth Rollins. I mean, I've always been a fan of Seth Rollins as well. I worked a show with him back when he was on the Indies many years ago, somewhere out in Kansas. He's another one that's gotten so good over the years.
Yeah, I remember going to a 3XW show once. He wasn't even advertised. He made a surprise appearance on the show. This is when he was Ring of Honor champion, and yeah, he made a surprise appearance, and of course he was signing autographs, taking pictures afterwards, and I got my picture taken with him, and I was with my brother-in-law at the time. I was like, "Hey, do you want me to get your picture with him?" He's like, "Ah, nah." My brother-in-law's kicked himself ever since. I told him then, I'm like, dude, this guy's gonna be it. Like, just watch. And yeah, I remind him about it all the time. I'm like, hey, remember that time? And he's like, yeah, shut up.
Yeah. Let's see who else. Man, there's I think MJF is probably one of the best heels right now out there. His promo work is so good, and I think it's because he basically gets to say and do whatever he wants without the restraints. I don't think if he was in WWE, he would have that kind of freedom with his promo style.
Yep.
He could probably still get the character over, but I think what is helping,
his promo be down.
Absolutely 100%. Those are just a few that really catch my eye that I really like watching. There's probably quite a few more, but yeah, those are just a few. I've always been a fan of Samoa Joe. I got to meet him once, seen him in action in person before. AJ Styles. I mean, really, I mean, you can't, I mean, that guy is another guy who's been around for a long time and has only gotten better. And I'm just like, I don't see how that's possible.
He was the one guy I was always afraid of to go to WWE because I didn't know how WWE would use him. I was genuinely afraid for him to go to WWE because I've been a fan of his for years with TNA and Impact Wrestling, but there was only so much he could do there. And I understand his reasoning for going to WWE. So when he went there and he's been actually had a great career there, I've been more than happy for him because, yeah, he was a guy I was just extremely worried about how he was going to be used.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Some of his best work I thought was in early TNA.
Mm-hmm.
I caught glimpses of his work in Japan, like after he left TNA, you know, and before he came to WWE, but caught little glimpses here and there. But yeah, he's so good. I actually got to work a couple of shows with him way back in the day. Even took one of his seminars, which, Lord, that he kicked my butt real bad. His seminars are no joke. But so I got to talk to him on a personal level, as well as a wrestling level too. So AJ Styles is another one that I like.
So when you're driving from show to show, what do you listen to? Music, podcast? What's in the Iceman's car?
It varies. Um, Usually the beginning of the trip is some music, and I just kind of bounce around. Uh, Believe it or not, I like to listen to a lot of Elvis Presley.
Oh, nice.
I'm a huge Elvis guy. Have been since I was a kid. And I don't know why I listen to it when I'm on my way to a show. You would think I'd be listening to something else to get me like in the zone, so to speak. But listen to a little bit of that, and then I'll jump around to like some of the modern music. If like on Sirius, they've got like the 90s and 80s stations, stuff like that. So I'll listen to that, and then podcasts. I mean, I love listening to podcasts. Probably listen to more podcasts on the way to a show than I do on my way back home. Because I think on the way back home, I'm just tired. And if I'm sitting listening to somebody talk, but so I'll listen to more music on the way home. But yeah, podcast. And gosh, I have, of course, a bunch of wrestling ones. I'll listen to Jim Cornette's occasionally. I'll listen to Chris Jericho's. I got a couple of friends of mine up around the Kansas City area that has a wrestling podcast called The Spanish Announce Table.
Okay, I've heard of them. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been a guest on there multiple times. I've hung out with those guys. They're really cool. And then I am always, a sucker for a good conspiracy theory story. So there is a podcast called Theories of the Third Kind. And it's all kinds of stuff. It's all kinds of crazy stuff. I haven't listened to it in a while, so I'm kind of behind on some of the episodes. But oh my gosh, you want to talk about some really good stories where some of them are true stories, and then others are, is it true or is it conspiracy? It's like, So that's kind of the mix I go with. The most recent one I listened to is one of my old promoters from Metro Pro. Him and a mutual friend of ours started a podcast called The Worst Territory in the World. And it's based on the Central States territory, like St. Joe, Kansas City, St. Louis. And they've been interviewing a lot of people, a lot of like some of the old timers that have wrestled during that time. So it's been pretty cool listening to that. So.
Well, I don't got a whole lot more time here left for you. So before Bridge City Slam, do you have any other bookings that people can be aware of that where they can catch you at next? What's next on the Iceman schedule?
Well, this Saturday on May 6th, I've got a big show right here in my hometown of Chillicothe, Missouri, which I bill myself being from Kansas City, but Chillicothe is like an hour and a half, like northeast of Kansas City. So we got a big show coming up here in town, and I'm in the main event, taking on Luke Langley, the guy I mentioned earlier, for a company called Tri-States Wrestling. They're pretty new.
Okay. Yep.
They just started up about a year ago. Well, Luke is the heavyweight champ, and I'm the number one contender. And it just so happened to fall that we're doing a show in my hometown. So that's coming up this weekend. And then I'll be traveling back out again. I've got some stuff, I think May 27th down in Sedalia, Missouri for New Breed Wrestling. I think I got a couple of New Breed Wrestling shows coming up before I get to Bridge City Slam. So
excellent. And yeah, hopefully I'll have to talk to Mr. Bayless. Hopefully by the time this podcast drops, we'll have more information on the CEW Facebook page about what you're doing at Bridge City Slam. So
right, yeah.
And of course, don't forget, everybody, Bridge City Slam is going to be Friday, June 2nd and Saturday, June 3rd. See legends such as Kurt Angle, Deborah, Jimmy Hart, Cowboy Bob Orton, and many, many more. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to get back to Ottumwa and get to Bridge City Slam weekend now. So it's going to be a lot of fun, man. And for people that would like to follow you, where can they follow you on the social media websites?
I'm on Twitter. You can follow me. It's at the Iceman 4, the number 4 EVA. So the Iceman forever. On Twitter, it's the same thing on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. Just search the Iceman. I'm also on TikTok. I'm on Snapchat. I'm on all the socials. which I've kind of been lacking on the TikTok thing. I kind of go through spurts where I'll post a lot of content, and then I just spend more time looking at other people's content than posting. So, but yeah, if you want to find me on all the socials, I'm really active on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram every now and again. So Twitter and Facebook are probably the two most used social media apps where they can keep up on all my wrestling adventures or stuff outside of wrestling. So.
And I'll be sure to include all those down in the description of this podcast as well, in case you guys did not be able to catch all that. So go ahead and click the description. You should be able to find all his socials in there. Iceman, thank you very much for being our special guest on the Countdown to Bridge City Slam. You guys, until next time, that's going to do it for us here on the World Wide Web.